I'm not sure if the pictures gave it away or not, but I had a blast this week playing games and playing with lions and really telling the Bible story of Daniel. And it occurred to me that you might ask, why would you work hard at teaching kids the story of Daniel? I don't know. Like, if you thought about it, you might guess maybe kids love animals. They do, and there's lions involved, and kids love animals. Like, we had a petting zoo over at the gym, and kids and these bunnies just had such a blast. Or maybe we tell the story of Daniel because it's about Babylon. And you know what kids like? Kids like imaginary trips to magical places where animals smile and things are okay. In fact, you might even think that kids love or kids need stories like this, where animals smile, and it might serve as an escape because, let's be honest, sometimes the real world is really hard. And sometimes it might help to get away from it a little bit. But that's not what this story is about at all. I actually remember when I was in high school, I went to an art museum, and I went to look at, I remember looking at this painting from the Renaissance. It was a depiction of the Daniel story. And this isn't the painting, but when I looked at it as a teenager, it was really jarring and unsettling, because I was actually visibly upset because this Renaissance painter got the story wrong. The painter made it look like more like a bloody gladiator movie than the kind of story that you tell to kids. Instead of smiling lions, the painting imagined starved-looking lions that were really ferocious. And instead of like safe backgrounds like this, it's kind of reassuring. The painter imagined just grotesque human remains with skulls and like random body parts all over. And instead of smiles, the painter imagined Daniel half naked, looking terrified. It wasn't a reassuring story at all. It was jarring. It seemed like the kind of Bible story that you might, or the bedtime story that you tell your kids if you really want to make sure that they're going to have bad dreams and keep you up all night. And I remember looking at a painting like this, upset. And I was a teenager. I was a bit of an expert in a lot of things, and I knew this story. I went to Sunday school, VBS, kids' church, and that's not how it goes. And then I read the book, and I don't know why we tell this story to kids. Like, Daniel is not really a safe story for kids. And I don't know if everyone's like this. I'm the kind of dad that I just don't want my kids to know just how bad things are in the world. Like, I'll give you an example. There's this old Disney Snow White book that I would read to my 2-year-old daughter. And my kid loved it because there's dresses and there's princesses, and she loves this. I remember reading the book, and I got to this one page, and I'd go, I forgot about this. There's this page in this kid's storybook where the wicked stepmom sends Snow White off for a hike, and with this woodsman, and I couldn't believe it says this in a bedtime story, but the instructions go something like this. The stepmom says, "Go kill Snow White, cut her heart out with a knife, and bring it back to me in a box." Like, and of course, the woodsman doesn't do that. He kills an animal, but I'm reading this story to my little girl, right, before bed. She's a toddler, and I don't feel like I could do this, so I skip the page. Anybody else do that? Right? Or I'll change the words, like the stepmom says, "I don't think I love my daughter that much," and just skip the whole killing thing. Or I lie to my kids, like, this is what the story goes, but it's not. In fact, I want to talk to my parents about this. Like, I mean, you think media is bad now, but seriously, you guys, you wrote fairy tales about, like, cutting kids' hearts out? So I skip this page because I don't want my kids to be exposed to this, and I don't think I'm the only one who thinks I should shelter my kids from terrifying stories, right? You should know that when you really read Daniel, it is one of those terrorizing, not safe for kids stories. And it's actually worse, because it's not just a story that we change a little bit to make it safer for kids. It's a story about really, really bad things that actually happen to kids. And somehow the kids in the story of Daniel actually made it through. And they grew through adversity. That's what Daniel's about. And it occurred to me, I didn't get a chance to tell the real story of Daniel to kids. We made it a little bit cuter than maybe it really is in the Bible. Is it okay if I kind of give you some of the adult details in this story? Can you handle it? Don't have any bad dreams during church. That's just weird. All right, so here's what you should know. Daniel is this kind of story that if you saw it on the news, you would probably change the channel if kids were around. It's the kind of thing where if you're talking to another adult and your kids were around, you would start spelling out words because you don't want them to know what's going on. It's one of these things that, well, seems terrifying. But it occurred to me that even the best parents can't protect their kids from the world for very long. You ever think about that? We live in a really messed up world, and kids can't be sheltered from it forever. Now, I was thinking about just the stats. We had about 130 kids, and I don't know all their stories, but if stats are right, I could tell you and I'm pretty sure this is true, in a group of kids that large, it is statistically guaranteed that we had a couple kids in our church whose parents are suffering from drug addiction. There are kids who are in this program who've seen things that no kid should ever have to see. I bet we had some kids who've seen domestic or sexual abuse. I'll bet we've had some kids who've seen the death of a sibling or a parent or someone close. We've probably had kids who are being abandoned by their parents, somewhere stuck in the foster system. I'll bet we had some parents we had kids who have parents who lost a job or maybe way worse. I'll bet in a group that size, odds are we have some kids who have close relatives who are suffering from cancer. Actually, this isn't a stat. I actually had some of my nieces and nephews there, and they were at our VBS because they were visiting here from Redding, Redding, California, and they were evicted from their home because of the forest fires. It occurred to me that as hard as you might try, you cannot shelter kids forever from tragedy. You can't just skip over pages in life. It also occurred to me that maybe we'd be a little better off if instead of pretending bad things don't exist, maybe if kids could be prepared for it. Be prepared for the fact that this world is messed up, it's broken. This world we live in is full of tragedy, injustice, oppression, sickness, death. I mean, that's a fact. And that is what Daniel says in vivid detail, provocative statements. This is the story of Daniel. Let me just tell you some details. It is a story, here's a background, about 4 young Hebrew kids. And guess what? They came from really messed up homes. Messed up families, homes, community, towns. Their community, their families had for hundreds of years disobeyed God. And that looked like, of course, profound injustice. It looked like abusing kids. It looked like not valuing human life. It looked like pride. You can read all about it in other parts of the Bible. But it's all what you'd expect when people don't have a good foundation or values. And what happened in the beginning of the book of Daniel is, well, a community with no character or ethics. It was all corrupt. Guess what happens when people don't care about God? Well, it all caught up with them. And the prophets call it a punishment for disobeying God, and it was, but also felt like the natural cycle of selfishness, of unwise community. Because what happened is the great empire of Babylon invaded, and they didn't just pillage and rape and destroy. And I don't even want to skip over that too quickly. Like, the kids in this story saw unimaginable carnage. But the invading army also kidnapped these 4 kids. Their strategy was to separate young men, probably a little bit younger than elementary school age, but they'd take these kids, rip them from their parents, and bring them to Babylon. And it was sort of a cruel move, but it was also strategic because this empire would invade countries and they'd take some of their kids and raise them up, in part to learn culture, in part as a natural security deterrent, because if you're a parent, you're less likely to attack an army if, well, one of your kids is in that army, right? It's kind of smart on their half. What I'm about to do is a little bit risky. You are all going to get distracted by this picture. I'm going to risk it anyway, because I want you to kind of understand how bad it was for the characters in the book of Daniel. The characters in the book of Daniel, I mean, it's actually a lot worse than this, but it is one of those stories that you don't want your kids to know about. It's a little like those images you see of TV, of kids who are separated from their parents now at our borders, stuck in a system somewhere. And I realize our country is divided about whose fault it is, but it seems like everybody agrees that this, kids being ripped away from their homes, the trauma of that, being taken away from your community and taken away from your parents, being raised somewhere else, is really hard. And everyone's asking, how do you recover from this? That, right there, that scene is how Daniel starts off, except it's a lot worse. That's their background. Daniel and his friends are taken away from their parents, and they're looking back at the bloody bodies of loved ones on the ground, burned buildings, brokenness, and they're just stuck. The book of Daniel is their story. And the background is really simple. They don't just get ripped away from their parents. On top of that, and you could read the details in the book of Daniel for yourself, they really quickly are put under extreme pressure. So Daniel and a couple other kids are sent to this weird camp, and it's not all bad, but right off the bat, they have to learn new language, they get new names, new customs, new religions, and part of ancient religion came with dietary laws. So imagine what it'd be like to be one of these kids. You are ripped out of your homes, you're kidnapped by really powerful people, they change your name, you're not allowed to worship the God that you were taught to believe in, and you're under a whole lot of pressure. And these are kids vulnerable, traumatized, and now they're under extreme pressure. And you can read about this. And these are, I mean, if the book ended there, you go, this is a horrible story. But then it gets worse. There's this weird scene where Daniel more or less gets an internship, and he gets an impossible job. And you may know that, like, there are some really hard people to work with, like maybe think about parents who abuse kids or bosses that are unreasonable. Check this one out for size. This is what happened to Daniel. One day, Daniel's boss, and Daniel's a young guy at a time, he gets called in with all of his coworkers into his boss's office. And the boss says more or less, hey guys, I had a dream last night, and now I can't remember what it was. That's not weird. This is where it gets weird. He calls in Daniel and his coworkers and says, look, let me see how good you guys are. I want one of you to tell me the dream that I can't remember that I had. Which is weird. And then he raises the stakes. This is Daniel 2. Let me just think about your boss telling you this. This is what I firmly decided, says Daniel's boss. Look, if you can't tell me what my dream is, and if you can't interpret it, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you cut into pieces, and I'm going to have your house turned into a pile of rubble. But if you can tell me my dream and interpret it, I'm going to give you a reward and honor. So look, tell me my dream and interpret it. Can you imagine? And shocker, nobody could do it. So the boss, without even thinking, does what he says he's going to do, sends out the assassination squad who's going door to door, ready to torture. You see what it says? Cut in pieces Daniel and his coworkers. That's a little bit traumatizing, right? And then it gets a little bit worse. This is not a fun story here. In the next episode, Daniel 3, there's this test The boss is a dictator. He's ego-driven. He's trying to show off how powerful he is. He has the best technology. He has the most wealth on the planet. And he's showing off all of that. And one of the things he shows off is a mass execution chamber. This was a long time ago. It's a barbaric time. It was a culture where they had human sacrifices. And you could read the details about it, but they built this giant gas chamber that got so hot that like the technicians, the staff that worked on this thing they would often die just from being next to the thing and breathing in the fumes next to this execution chamber. And the deal was, everybody, it was in bold print, the deal was, look, if you don't raise your hand or whatever and say, look, this dictator is the best thing in the world. Nebuchadnezzar, you're God, we're going to worship you. If you do that, that's okay. You may know the story. But if you really thought that there was something bigger than this Babylonian king, well, you'd have your beliefs put to the test, and you'd get sent into this furnace. And this is not, I don't know why we tell this story to kids. It is not a good story for kids. This is horrible. What else? All right, the lions. So by the end of chapter 6, we see Daniel is about to experience even more abuse. And he's in this weird system of lying and deceit and backstabbing, and he's been in this for years. It's a really competitive, dysfunctional workplace. And the cool thing about Daniel is he's consistently done the right thing. He has character, he has ethics, he has grit. And the new boss notices this, that everybody else is cutting corners, embezzling, cheating, and he can't really nail them down. But there's something different about Daniel. He trusts Daniel. So he gives him extra responsibility and privilege, and that, of course, makes everybody else jealous. They're out to get Daniel. They try what they can. They try and gossip about Daniel, but no one believes anything bad about this guy. And finally, after trying a couple other things to stab Daniel in the back, more or less, they finally, and you can read the details in the Bible, but through fine print and legalese, they trick this dictator into signing this discriminatory law that just targets just Daniel. The law is basically, look, if anybody who prays like Daniel is going to get tortured in the worst way possible. And the worst way possible was, well, this. But this sort of looks like a petting zoo. Like, it wasn't a petting zoo. What they did back then was barbaric, inhumane, probably abusing animals too. It's probably a little bit more like the gladiatorial games in Rome. What they did is they would capture lions and, well, they'd beat them and they'd mistreat them and they'd starve them. And after they were like messed up, the animals, they would throw prisoners to them. It's a little like the gladiatorial games in Rome, except they didn't give anybody weapons. And nobody wanted to watch because everybody knew what was going to happen. Mistreated, starving predators. They don't smile. They aren't kind. The old painting was probably right. It must have smelled like rotting human flesh. It would have been gross. Nobody survives this method of execution and torture. Everyone dreaded it. And the crazy thing is God didn't stop it. Daniel was tried, convicted, and sent to be executed. All right, so this is the story of Daniel. I mean, one awful, awful story after another. And don't worry, we didn't tell the kids all the details of this. We kind of made it a little bit cuter. I'm not really sure why. The tragedy, though, well, let me say this. The reason why this story is so powerful, not just for kids, but for adults too, but that Daniel is more than the highlights of his story. It's also a story of finding a solution to a bigger problem, one that, let's just be honest for a second, all of us ask this question, few of us know the answer. And if you find yourself living out the pages of your own personal tragedy, here's what you ask. what helps when you're going through tragedy? Because here's the truth, all of us go through really hard times. Like, what could possibly help you if you have a messed up family? What could possibly help you if you have a messed up job or an incredible task? What do you do if you're looking death in the face or watching loved ones fall apart? What could possibly help you? When you go through the depth of despair, if you're losing a house, losing a marriage, losing your health. And what if we had a good answer to this question for our kids, for ourselves? Because we have to answer this. Like, you can't avoid it. There is no possibility that you can avoid the consequences of living in this messed up world. Like, you can't skip pages. If a doctor looks across to you and says, I'm afraid you have malignant cancer, like, spelling it doesn't make it not real. You can't skip over the undesirable pages in the story of your life because we live in a messed up world and you can't avoid it. Think about this for a second. Most people, everybody has to answer this question, right? Most people answer it by, what do? We ignore it. We escape. We try coping it with anything, like exercise, junk food. We withdraw from people. We go to substances. We get angry. We get lazy. We become workaholics. Folks go to addictions. We close up. We open up. We try and fill our needs with food or dieting or diversions in depression. Folks, part of human nature is that we will try anything to answer this question. What do I do when I'm in a messed up world? If you really think about it, you know this already. None of that works, does it? None of it ultimately works. Maybe just for a little bit. But what if we had a better answer to this question? In fact, what if there was something that could help kids, help adults cope? What if there was something that could help you keep on going, that even in the toughest times, it would give you what you need to keep on going when what looks ahead seems impossible? If there was a good answer to this question, would you want to know what it is? Would you give it a shot? This is actually why Daniel is such a compelling story. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back and look at each of those little stories in the life of Daniel, and we're going to look for Daniel's secret. Because there's something different about that guy. Because he not only survived a bunch of things that would have wrecked anybody else, but he was victorious in each of these messed up circumstances. What was different about Daniel? Let's look at Daniel 6. So we left the story about Daniel. He was locked up in an execution by mauling chamber. Now, I'm not going to tell you the whole story about what Daniel did. Let me just ask you to overhear a conversation that happened right afterward, a conversation between Daniel's boss and Daniel. You tell me if you could figure out Daniel's secret. This is Daniel verse 6 or chapter 6:20. This is the king who comes after Daniel has survived the night with these lions. He goes, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, who you serve continually, was he able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, my God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lion. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. You see some pretty not subtle clues, right? Daniel served God, he trusted God, and everybody knew it. The Daniel story tells us nothing else if it doesn't tell us that that's really hard, but that's what he did. All right, let's keep going backwards. What about those guys who had the impossible choice between either being executed in this furnace or compromising their values, ethics, and characters? Well, they obeyed, they trusted God, and they risked it all. There's actually this scene, I'm going to read part of this for you. When they got called out, put on the spot This is Daniel 3, I'll start in verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar, this is the dictator, asks, is it true that you do not serve my God or worship the image of gold that I've set up? If you do not worship it, in case you didn't get the memo, you're going to get thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And I love this line. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my hands? Listen to what they say. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego respond. King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves against you. Look, if we are sent into the blazing furnace, since you asked, it's actually the God that we serve who is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But, and I love this line, but even if he does not, even if God does not rescue us, you should know we will not serve your gods. And by the way, God, this is frightening. God doesn't stop the empire from throwing these kids into the furnace. You should know this story, and it's actually terrible. They get big guys to throw them into the furnace, and the big guys actually die from breathing the fumes. But what's amazing about this story is that as they obey and they trust God, these 3 young kids walk through the fire, and it's a miracle. Not a hair on their head is singed. They're able to breathe in the middle of this. And anyone who could squint and look into the flames saw a 4th figure, perhaps Christ himself. And they walk away and their clothes don't even smell like smoke. It's amazing. Oh, and that story about the whole dream thing, how does Daniel respond to the execution squad at his door? Well, he goes, let me just pray and trust God. It's extraordinary. God comes through. And I'm going to read another couple lines. This is not Daniel. This is, again, the king. The king says to Daniel, surely, based on what I just saw, your God is a God of gods, the revealer of mysteries. For you were able to reveal this mystery because he did. What about their backgrounds? That early story about these separated kids having to change religions and diets and all this pressure they're against. Guess what they did? They obeyed and they trusted God. They obviously were under a lot of pressure. They told their kidnappers, look, we all want the same thing. We want to be healthy. Let's do this. Let us obey God and trust God, and let's just see what God does. You give us your tests and see who's better off. It's extraordinary. These young kids obeyed God, they trusted God, and God did something amazing. By every metric, these kids were, and the text says, 10 times better than everybody else. One more thing, right? What about this horrible background? This whole being ripped away from their homes, death, separation. You might guess that they would obey and they trust God and everything was fine, but you'd be wrong. The answer to that question is what the last half of the book of Daniel is about. The fact is, lots of our world's tragedies are pretty unfixable. You can recover from things, but there are harms that happen in your life that you can't forget, you can't undo. Our messed up world causes damage that will never be undone in our lifetimes. That is what the rest of the book of Daniel is about. That's huge. I'm not going to read this for you, but Daniel says in provocative terms that in the future, one day, God is going to make everything right. One day, the justice that seems impossible, God will bring back. The things that you've lost that you may never get back, God will give back with interest. And it will take both God's wrath to bring justice and his generosity. So this is the book of Daniel, full of side-by-side tragedy and courage. It is living proof that despite the worst of your circumstances, God is sovereign. He overrules and eventually will overcome human evil. In fact, this cross behind me is a symbol of someone else who had to do just that, like everyone else. We followed Jesus, who obeyed God when it was really hard, and he trusted God in his agony, and he rose victorious ahead of us. And that Jesus Christ himself demonstrates victory over suffering and tragedy. So let me ask you a question. It's a question we ask kids. How might your life look differently if you tried Daniel's secret, obeying and trusting God, instead of whatever else you're doing to try and get through this messed up world? Where would it start? I'm not going to lie to you. Like, it looks like it's really hard. Like, their lives don't seem easy. It looks like you'd have to start with some hard, disciplined action. But what are some things that you would have to do? Or what are some things you might have to stop doing that you're using in an unhealthy way to cope now? I am convinced that if you could see our God the way Daniel sees him, in a true, undistracted way, if you could just, even for a little bit, get an unhindered vision of our holy, holy, holy God, I think you would get what you need to survive and thrive in this messed up world. And I think if you could do that, our kids, our families, our communities, our country will be better off for it. So Father in heaven, thank you for the story of Daniel. I pray that you would give us a nearness, give us the sense that you are close to us in a way that only you can. Oh God, can you draw us to yourself in a way that gives us the power and the courage to face whatever difficulty life will throw at us. Father, be with our kids. Help them to have the grit, the resolve, the courage to get through whatever life throws at them because they have a foundation that is our solid rock, that is you. Can you help them help us to do daring things because we have an amazing God? I ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.